Well, hello everyone. It's Jan and Joe, the sort of modern day replacement for Lewis and Martin, I guess. I'm not sure. Perhaps we're not a comedy routine, but particularly today because
Anderson Cooper, maybe, or
yeah, that's right, something more contemporary. But it's definitely not comic material today because Jan and I have been talking, and we wanted to basically outline the damage that has been done to individuals, the burden that we carry with us, the psychological weapons that have really injured us, and then the idea is to try to go through, what has happened, give an overview of it, and then talk about how it impacts our everyday relations. And then hopefully at the end, we can talk about things that we can do to make it better. And, I wanted to start out going quite a ways back in time just to give a perspective as to what has happened. And I was going to go back all the way into the 19th century, into the 30-Year War, where German peasants were paying money to eat human flesh, according to the accounts. And then you had the Napoleonic Wars. You see these pictures of Napoleon with his hand hidden inside his vest. I mean, the unseen hand of Freemasonry. And this is sort of, I think, the concept that I would like people to look at history with is that you have this very thin veneer of power, and this group is able to basically manipulate and has manipulated both sides of the struggle, so that Europeans will basically slaughter one another. If you go into the Civil War, you can see, this Freemason kind of shadow. I mean, there are pictures of Grant and Sherman looking for a obelisk in Egypt, to commemorate the Freemason victory. And here, basically, that was the first time that Gentiles were ever made to walk into automatic weapon fire. Here where the Gatling gun came about, and you have things like Gettysburg, where you have just this bizarre slaughtering of tens of thousands of people. Following the Civil War and following Lincoln's assassination, Andrew Johnson invited Albert Pike, the head Freemason, into his office, and the individuals who saw the relationship said that Pike was the superior, that Pike was actually the one who basically ordered Johnson about. You move forward into World War I. Here you're getting into the tens of millions. I don't have good data on the German side of the line, but I know on the Allied side there were Freemason generals who were basically ordering their sergeants to stand there with revolvers and shoot anyone who wouldn't walk into the automatic weapon fire. So here you had just a complete Holocaust. World War II, you've got this situation where this bizarre cultural distortion, the Nazis, comes about, and then for some reason the leader is evidently insane and wants to fight down to the last man, and so then you have just a complete Holocaust. And of course, in between World War I and World War II, you had the Holodomor, the Ukrainian famine, where over 10 million people evidently. Again, Gentiles don't count very well. We can't count up to 6 million somehow. We just can never quite get the number. When you go through all these wars, you're looking at maybe 500 million people, but good luck trying to get hard data. You just have there's no possible way to know. The Holodomor was perhaps as much as 10 million. Yagoda, who was in charge of this maniac, henchman of Stalin, Jewish individual. You can read in Wikipedia different explanations for how it occurred or why it occurred. Bottom line is, it just wiped out all of these Ukrainian civilians. And then if you look through the photographic material on the internet, you'll see that this maniac Yagoda was also in charge of the Gulag. And there you can see pictures of his henchmen with their hands hidden inside. There's a collection of pictures with, you have like 10 of these individuals who are working for him, all with their little hand, hidden inside the vest. This cryptic reference to Freemasonry. Now, today we have the PNAC Wars, the Project for the New American Century. They never end, 16 years after the start of them. The terrorism is worse than ever. ISIS is out of control. We're going to have to redouble our drone strikes, and it just looks like a whole bunch of people are going to get slaughtered. Now, in the midst of all this, in 1957, the government took another tact against the civilian, and this was, MK Ultra. And Jan has done just an outstanding job in bringing that to the public's attention, so that we can see from Gordon Wasson's phony trip to Mexico forward that the whole counterculture was basically just a weapon to shatter us, to break down the family. And so, we have been successfully attacked, and the attack is never seen. It's the blow that you can't defend yourself against because it comes through government. Somehow an organization has slithered into positions of power across basically all European governments and is able to manipulate the population into war, poverty, and political impotence. So, when you meet one another, when you come to one another to form relationships and to form families, to form congregation, to form community, one thing that you should bring to that relationship is the awareness that the people that you're meeting are the survivors of an absolute, over a century-long onslaught and destruction, a Holocaust. And so that is what I think is a really good start to begin the relationship. It's just the awareness that you're dealing with people who are really damaged, people who have the reflection of all of these events inside their personality. Jan and I often talk about the psychological techniques that the government does, neuro-linguistic programming, the insertion of drugs, the welfare state that's designed to shatter the family, all of these elements. But there is this other thing, which is just that when you have been through as many wars as our direct ancestors have been through for the last 150 years, you are in shell shock. You're in cultural shell shock. And that is something that I think people need to understand, need to remember, and they should see it both in the people that they're dealing with, but also in themselves. And I think that we also have the other issues, the psychological. Weaponized anthropology is used against us, the fact that they train us to think illogically. And of course, then there's the body, the diet, the toxins. This is reflected in the sperm count is basically 50% of what it was. And when you think about that, you can see that you're really dealing with people who are carrying around a lot of ill health inside them, So,
well, and, Joe, just to add right there too, sure. And then the low sperm count adds to a lot of anger in men. And then you see all of this advertising on radio and TV now for, take this or that drug for for testosterone.
Yeah, Viagra,
right. Excuse me. When the issue is a diet that's too low in fat and cholesterol and too high in grains. And if people would simply get off of the grains and get back onto a high-fat diet and stop taking Lipitor and stuff like that, like their doctors are telling them, You know, a lot of that specifically could be reversed, but then all of that feeds into this larger picture, this whole amalgamation of all of these ways that we're being targeted, that that you're saying, the psychological, the diet, the environment, and the doctors being the number 3 cause of death, and
Right.
this stuff, right?
Yeah, and I mean, if you go back to the show we did on the authoritarian personality in the American Jewish Committee, they talk about bringing an array of psychological science to this reprogramming of the Gentile project that they clearly describe in section 23 of the authoritarian personality, the conclusion. And then if you go forward in time, you'll see that so many of these individuals end up in MK Ultra. The question arises of, exactly to what extent is the perspective of section 23 then reflected in MK Ultra? Remember, MK Ultra was, the documents were by and large destroyed. I think it was Helms ordered them destroyed. It was just by circumstance that a small fraction of the total amount are still in existence. So you
mostly just the financial records, which I think were box 7.
Yeah,
they're withholding information on Richard Evans Schultes and stuff. That's box 9. They held a FOIA request of mine for 2 or 3 years before they finally denied it on box 9. So.
Right. And so you have to kind of work through it analytically with the evidence we have. And there is fortunately enough data. And I'm specifically referring to the thing we mention almost every single show, which is the document which proves that Gordon Lawson's trip to Mexico, which begins the so-called psychedelic movement in the United States, was it was a project of MK Ultra. So this is just the bedrock from which you can understand people like Kesey and Tim Leary and Allen Ginsberg, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what we've been subjected to, right? We a very thin veneer of power. It has some connection into Freemasonry, and I would just recommend, if you want to kind of see how the literature reflects this, I have articles which you can go to Gnostic Media, or you can go to postflaviana.org, and you can read the articles on Catcher in the Rye and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and you can see that there is a combine, which is the term Kesey used, of secret organizations which have a relationship to one another that are able to basically manipulate our culture, manipulate our political structure. Last week, or I forget, I think it was last week, we talked about, if you just look at what was available in the backstage of the Grateful Dead, in the band and in their manager and in their financiers and the girlfriends and the people who are providing them drugs. I mean, it is just a tip to stern panoply of secret societies. You've got
and that includes intelligence agencies, because those are, in fact, secret societies.
Yeah, of course, exactly right. Intelligence agencies are secret societies.
The intelligence community is the occult.
Exactly right. I couldn't agree more. And so what you have is, this first ban, this seminal ban, is simply so integrated into these secret societies. There's so many of them involved that it cannot possibly be circumstance. So when you're looking at a way that the culture was taken, perhaps as an experiment, perhaps to create permanent, mental feebleness. I mean, I don't know what exactly was in back of it, but they definitely turned us toward the psychedelic, toward LSD, toward music and trances.
The New Age.
The New Age, right. And then, and in addition to that, you can see, looking at the A Course in Miracles, which is neo-Christianity, where Jesus is channeling these different ideas. I mean, that was another MK Ultra project, right? Thetford and Schuckman were both MK Ultra employees. This is just the facts. These aren't even things which they can contest, because there's just
well, it's right on their website.
Well, they're outed. I mean, it's sort of like Gloria Steinem trying to claim that she's not a CIA agent. I mean, right. It's just preposterous.
Well, and let's see, just to pull this up here, A Course in Miracles. William Thetford was MK Ultra subproject 69 and 89.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so this is, you know, things like the Course in Miracles and what was the other one? Hans Werner Erhard that started.
You know, I mean, these are simply structures. They're intellectual.
Werner Hans Erhard. Yeah, sorry. Landmark education. These things all appear to be connected.
Yeah, yeah. You can. They're easy to connect using the brain, and so, you know, you can see that getting us to think illogically in a magic world, in a magic kingdom, was obviously part of the project. And so when you have like Disneyland, and you see that, you know, you have Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer's Island, you know, Lewis Carroll, Peter Pan, Snow White. I mean, it's nothing but an enormous homage to Freemasonry authors. And then, of course, Walt Disney was a Demolay, which is this weird Freemason youth group. And then, of course, Disney was part of the Uplifting Lucifer program in Santa Monica Canyon before the Magic Kingdom came about, with Frank Baum, you know, the author of The Wizard of Oz. And so,
right.
So anyway, we've been physically shattered, and our bodies have been toxified. The diet we are given is basically the slave diet, the diet to keep us enfeebled. And then you have the Magic Kingdom and all of the media stupidity.
All of the magical thinking with all of the New Age and the quantum physics and
Thetford and Schumann.
And then you add in things like the whole vegan vegetarian agenda, which you see back in Plato's Republic, him talking about using that as a control of the masses.
Yeah.
And of course, the low-fat diet, you know, the brain is like 70% cholesterol, so you're attacking the brain that lives off of fat and cholesterol.
Yeah.
So all of these things going in together sort of come together in what is creating the personage of the modern slave, the modern, you know, depending on which level you are in Huxley's Brave New World.
Right.
And creating a plethora, a soup or stew full of different things that manifest in people today, including in problems and relationships and commitment, and you know, in all sorts of directions from there.
Sure, and I think key, or certainly, you know, important in this is the way that the single mom has been put on a pedestal. Rather than being represented as basically a social failure, a family that didn't exist, the single mom is almost glorified as heroic. You know, and of course, she is. There's no question. The problem is that everything can be weaponized, and to take the feelings of compassion that one would have toward a single mom, to the difficulty that such an individual would have raising a child, it is used as a way of accepting and normalizing this condition. And so in 1950s, you had, you know, I don't know exactly what the percentage of births out of wedlock, but it was quite small. And now, of course, it's over 50%. This is all done through social engineering. And so even though the single mom now has feminism, has the welfare state, and has social honor, the single mom doesn't have a family. You see, doesn't have a husband, doesn't have the kind of extended family that can exist when two people are brought together into a union. And so it's really not something that is you know, is beneficial to the highest degree. And the fact is, if you trace the way that the single mom has been made into something that has basically been put on a pedestal, you can go right back to Gloria Steinem, you know, and to the branch of feminism that's coming out of the CIA. So this is, I think you should look at it in the same context as the psychedelic movement. It's just another element of the things that we have to put up with. If you want to start a family today, you know, look at what is standing in your way. You have the access of the welfare state to single moms, which is always essentially working against the formation of permanent families. You have the glorification of the single mom as heroic, something that people have. That not only is there no stigma, but in fact, this is something that is actually representative of the best part of the human spirit. And then on the other side, you have males that have weaker sex drives than they might, because the diet and the toxins.
Right, and they're not as it sounds I'm having audio trouble, and they're not as masculine on top of that. And I hear women all the time complaining about what are they called, metrosexuals and effeminate men. I mean, you see them all the time walking down the streets in these ridiculous looking clothing, or even the gangbangers that wear their pants halfway down their asses. That came out of the prison system, and the men who did that were the submissive ones in the prison. Right. It was basically to let the other prisoners know that this one was a bitch. Right. And so all of this stuff is out there that is bringing up. Geez, I don't know what the heck is going on here. I've got a connection problem somewhere. But all of this is bringing people, men and women on both sides, into a state of lack of commitment, or into a state of chasing after dreams, and into a state of extended adolescence or arrested development, where they are waiting well into their late 30s or early 40s to begin, when they wake up and realize, after they've chased endless dreams, they, by the time they wake up and realize what they've done, they're, especially on the women's side, they're too old to have any more children, or they're, it's beyond the point of being able to make and build a family. And then you have, with all of these new age belief systems and the free love systems and stuff out there, you have within the counterculture people and new age groups, you have a total unwillingness to commit even to a relationship, that a relationship and stability is actually slavery. And you have the other side, and I even did a thread this week on Facebook to get various people's feedback on it. And what I found is that in all situations where this thread was about having exes involved in your current relationship, where it's not just children involved. And before the 50s and 60s, you pretty much didn't very often have this. You had, usually if a man and woman met, they were very often the first, and then they spent their lives together, and that was it. They only knew each other. But today you have this, what's the word I'm looking for? This dynamic where you have the spouse or the two spouses, and then often there's an ex-husband or ex-wife, and then sometimes beyond that, you have further ex-partners out there, ex-boyfriends and girlfriends, and things like that make things really interesting. I actually wanted to get into this tonight because I see it as something really important and really interesting, because just in the dynamics of a relationship itself and trying to keep the family together, this whole new age system that you see in new age communities, et cetera, has created this whole broken family industry. And then where you have single moms and things like that. And what I find interesting is that there appears to be, in those communities, the constant justification for this behavior. So you'll have, for instance, a man in his late 50s or a woman in her early 50s saying, who are single, don't have a family, haven't built anything with anybody, saying, oh yeah, we should have all these exes around. You have young single mothers saying, oh yeah, we should have all these exes around. And then you look at the other side, and that's what I found really interesting in this thread that I posted the other day. I took it down because I wanted to do a show on it, but I have it here in front of me. But almost everyone, with a few exceptions, said to keep the exes out of the relationship. And just, because that represents something in the past, leave it in the past. And then you had some people who were able to do that. But what I found was that unanimously, every single person said that if it's not beneficial and mutual to all parties involved, then the focus should be on the relationship and the exes should be kept out. So, for instance, if an ex is disrespectful or something, without exception, everybody's, blatantly across the board said the ex should be kept out. And, so what happens is, you have with these dynamics in this attack on the family and genteel culture, this thing inserted within the culture itself to prevent proper relationships and families and extended families from even developing, where people are focused on outside and all of this outside energy in a relationship rather than on the relationship itself. So ladies and gentlemen, if you have exes in a relationship that's constantly causing discord in the relationship, especially if they're disrespectful, they got to go. It's a whole other matter if the spouse is just being insecure for no reason. But if there is all of this discord being caused, if exes are causing disruption, they should be pushed out. And most people think that the exes should just be left behind in general.
Right. And for one thing, this problem wasn't as common, of course, in the 50s and 60s, because as you point out, so many marriages were successful that actually lasted, through the entire family process. And so the situation today, of course, is different because people have had so many relationships that they're literally a posse of exes that are always, kind of there and around. And the problem is not just that these people are there, but that the kind of centrifugal energy that would hold couples together is weaker now than ever before. I mean, we don't have I don't think our sex drive is as strong because of the toxins and the diet. I don't think our psychological attachment to one another is as strong because, for one thing, you have pornography. And this is particularly a plague on males.
Absolutely.
They have their sex life is through the representations on a screen. Where
and for more on that, people should also look up Gary Wilson's work because that's a hugely important topic. I'm glad you brought that up.
Right. Well, it's just I think that pornography is really an enormously negative force, and it's one of the things now that I really think is a great impediment against romantic and committed relationships, because when sex was something that two people basically had to work out between the two of them, this was a journey that could lead to intimacy and could lead basically to a closeness, that would be experienced as they went through the process. And
and last a lifetime at that.
Right, and the sexual drive would be an energy keeping them together, be part of the central force of relationship.
Exactly, and it actually sort of keeps the relationship energy together. But when you bring in all of these exes, it can totally change the dynamics of things.
And of course, pornography is one of those things that spins people off, because I often wonder now, when you have pornography as much a part of our culture as it is, you have these young men, 15, 16, 17, going out on their first dates, but they've already got 2,000 hours of pornography watching it, and that was a statistic I read somewhere. I mean, what kind of a relationship does someone like that expect to develop? What can he possibly see in this woman other than, this pornographic representation? And so the intellectual and kind of spiritual connections that would be developed through normal sexual development just have almost no chance. So
Well, and then what they're, and then you see online that they're called a prude and all if they're not open to the pornography, if they're not open to all of this sexual degradation,
Right.
they're ad hominem to ridicule them into accepting this type of behavior as normal.
Exactly. And so, getting back to, well, what to do? First of all, is just have awareness. Awareness, I think, should begin with yourself. Males should try to recognize and understand the effects that pornography is having on them. I don't think, there are almost, you mentioned Molson's work. I mean, thank heavens there are one or two people out there trying to document and to give the information to the public. But this is something that men should pursue. They should try to understand how exactly is pornography affecting them.
Guys, if you have a porn collection at home or on your computer as you're watching this, delete it.
Yeah, just get rid of it, because it is just mental poison. It's taking away from your ability to have real sex.
And real relationships, commitment, etc.
Exactly. And so that's one component. And the other one is that I wanted to mention is not just a negative one, get rid of pornography and stuff. When you bring awareness and you understand you're dealing with someone who comes out of this damaged historical structure and a specifically has been a target of weaponized anthropology, and this goes for either men or women, it's just the person that you're addressing. You really have to have that empathy, that sense of what they have actually gone through, because that's, I think, a step toward the kind of compassion we have to have for one another. We are really damaged creatures. And so one thing we need is to recognize that there is a unity that we should share, that we can't get to. We can't get to the intimacy and the friendships and the relationships because our minds and our bodies have been basically crushed. And so the first step is that compassion. And then the other thing I would say is that with all of this going against relationships, you just have to use the understanding of what has gone on to focus on commitment. You have to be able to say, this is really a sick world, but if it's ever going to get better, it is going to start right now.
You've got to agree to commit to the bitter end, to fight through it all, because only with that level of commitment between two people are you ever going to be able to work it out,
Right.
And here I'm a 45-year-old single male, saying this stuff, but I'm not saying it out of experience. I'm saying it because I've had enough, failed relationships, and I've been married twice. I caught my first wife cheating her way up the corporate ladder. She had just gotten hired at a new company, and 2 weeks later got a big promotion. And it turned out that she was having an affair with the boss right away. But so this is the type of thing that is coming around, and it's considered okay rather than working it through and fighting it through and keeping that relationship tight. But it's taken 20 years of researching and looking to even begin to be able to put the information together so that we can present it and explain it to people like Joe and I are doing now. So I mean, you have to go through it. Sure, the Christian community might understand some of this, and they're a lot better off. And of course, they're heavily targeted as well. And somebody leaves that, they may fall into all of this other stuff, and they may never get back to it. And by the time they may realize what's happened, it may be too late for them on top of it. So
Right.
it's basically you've got to. It's like the old vows, for better or for worse. I mean, that's kind of what it has to be, and you have to agree to make it work and to have the integrity and commitment and willingness to to stick it through.
Right. And the commitment, I think, has, you have to kind of think about, well, what actually does it mean, and what can I do to be committed? And one thing that, at least in my life, was valuable was simply understanding my voice. Understanding when I could detect that, and I've been married for over 30 years, when I could detect through the voice that there was basically a contradiction or an anger, something unresolved that was expressing itself. And because, you know, life goes by so quickly, our minds are not cosmic, and, you know, it's easy to reflect and things inside you that you don't really want to. And so that was
Right.
something that I found, was that I learned that to really be committed, I had to try to be aware of the tenor of my voice.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I could probably really learn too. I mean, you know, I have this deep, loud voice that people say is really good for radio and stuff. And, you know, and it's definitely something that I could work on. And I recognize that as well. And how long did it take you in being married to have this recognition?
About 20 years.
About 20 years. Wow. So obviously early on, you probably caused some, or, you know, there were a number of fights where you were too loud and boisterous, and then, you know, some issues on her side where she did something, etc., which is always how it is.
Right.
And then eventually, after 20 years of working on it together, you two finally nailed it down.
I think that's true, actually. And we don't have arguments now. And my voice is, you know, I'm able to, I think, manipulate it so that I can actually express this commitment. And it's something that I just think that I mean, was valuable to me. I can only say that far. I don't know how it would go. It's not the kind of thing that, of course, modern psychology, which is, of course, nothing but weaponized, you know, anthropology. You look from Freud all the way forward to Eric Fromm, the MK Ultra guys. I mean, all of that is garbage. It is a cesspool. If you have emotional problems, the last thing in the world you should be doing is looking for, you know, someone who has this kind of training, because it is just a cesspool. But what you know, what I found was that because, like I was saying, that you know, I have a temper, and when it would manifest in a way that I wouldn't recognize it.
And you're a huge guy, Joe.
I'm this huge guy, and but I would think, you know, damn it, I'm right. I have this rational point, but it was then I started to realize, well, you know, the emotional content of the words, you know, and I could see, if I looked carefully into myself, I could say, wait a second, it's really this damage. You know, once I started realizing, to the extent that I was the sacred victim, to use an expression, that it was really me who was the sacred victim, not other people. I started to realize, I go, you know, I really need to, like, look at how the kind of my responses, my interactions, about where this anger, this uncontrolled kind of negative programming leaks out. And that was something that I really started to realize that, you know, it leaks out, first of all, in my voice.
Well, and that's I'm glad you're talking about that, because I have the same issue, you know, and it's like I've gone through some pretty dramatic family issues in the past where I got some PTSD from it and stuff, and I think that's where most of it comes from. But you know, I do recognize it. It's just getting the control of it that you've spent 20 years working on yourself, you know. And so, but I mean, it's like you two have committed to yourselves to work on it. You know, I mean, how tall are you, Joe? Like 6'3", 6'4", 200?
Yeah, 6'3.5". I won't even say how much I weigh. Too much.
But yeah, I mean, you know, since you
35, I'm a huge guy, and I'm really kind of.
And your wife is very small and petite, and I've met your wife a number of times.
I could definitely take her.
I mean, yeah. Well, yeah. How tall is your wife? She's like,
she's gnarly, but I mean, yeah. She's
what, like 5'2", 5'3"?
She's petite, and but the thing is that, you know, it's like, and what's interesting is, at least this, again, I mean, just completely opening up. I'm not even exactly.
Well, you and I have never even talked about ourselves before,
right? You know, but the thing is that what I find is that when I have an awareness of the poison that's getting into my voice, and then I control it, that she can sense that. and then what happens is that her voice sort of reaches out and tries to help with the clarification of, because that's how people are. When we are in tune emotionally, we have this kind of synergy and energy that exists. That is animating. It creates energy. We want to go on with the discussion, and it creates, I think, endorphins. We feel good about it because we are social animals, and when you have this successful, intimate connection, then you have, you're satisfied.
Right. Absolutely. Whereas the opposite of that creates more tension, especially in the male.
Exactly. And so it's one of those things. It's like basically like logic. I would very similar to it in that once you start down the path, once you start down the righteous path, not the path that has been laid for you by the weaponized anthropology.
Right.
Start to walk down the logic. Once you start realizing how you are able to think about the world correctly, being able to recognize the voice tones and what they mean is the same kind of thing. In other words, it just becomes so obviously righteous. It's such a better way to go through an emotional relationship where you're trying to understand what you are reflecting that is in fact you're not in control over. That is like you say, it's post-trauma syndrome. I mean, that's really what we all have.
Right.
Really, our whole culture is just one big lump of it. And like we're going through the beginning of all these wars. They've got the guns at our back. We have to march into automatic weapon fire. Tens of millions. Starvation, poison, toxic. This thin little veneer of political power that's been, basically trying to destroy us for hundreds of years. And now we're sitting here, the survivors of this attack. Well, when you walk down this path of trying to find that connection, that moment of intimacy that is not tainted and polluted by the damage. You see what I mean? You start to move toward what you're really trying to say.
Sure.
You really want to express. The poison becomes visible.
But you have to. But first, you have to be honest with yourself that you're a victim of the poison and that the poison exists, and you have to stop lying to yourself and others in the relationship and and the dynamic situations that we all find ourselves in today. So it's not like it's an impossible thing. It's that you have to have a level of honesty, a level of commitment, a level of willingness to work through it and stick it out and look at, focus on the relationship first and foremost, and your partner, and then everything outside that secondary. And if outside secondary energy is disrupting the first one, then we disconnect from that second energy so that, it keeps the peace and tranquility within the first one. The first relationship should always go first and foremost again, and then everything else secondary. So, guys, if you have old girlfriends and stuff, unless she's pals with your wife or fiance or girlfriend, you should probably cut them off. And, and same thing with you women. If you have ex-boyfriends and lovers and fiancés and husbands, obviously if you have children, it's an exception and you probably have to keep them into the relationship, but otherwise you need to cut them out if it's causing, if they're causing disrespect, if they're not appreciative of your new relationship and your current relationship and your spouse, etc. All of this stuff has to be, considered, and we have to be honest with ourselves. We can't be in denial and, put this thing first, because what happens is we ended up, by the time we wake up to what's going on, we're going to be, again, in our late 30s, early 40s, waking up going, shoot, here we are. Here's the situation that I find myself in. And now it's really too late for me to do anything. So there's always a way to work through it, but they don't want us to figure that out.
Right. And the thing is that I think that, honestly believe that if people just stop and think about, what tone the voice is communicating, not the words and the idea, but the tone, and try to find a tone that will develop communication and intimacy. Just try to look for that tone.
Right.
Okay, you look for that tone, you'll see there'll be dramatic changes in your partner often. And it was
right.
And certainly I think in my experience it has been, because that's a format that they want to get into. And then suddenly there's energy. It becomes a pleasure that you get back into that social contract situation.
So what would you do for the first 20 years?
Well, my wife is a very developed soul, and she, and also I could see from the very beginning that I really wanted to have the relationship. I really wanted, we had children for one thing, right? So then what are you going to do? You want to work it out for them.
Sure.
But beyond that, I could see from the very beginning, and she really, in hindsight, she's a very wise person, sort of understands people. And she basically showed me that the communications we would have when the tone was right would be a great satisfaction to me. And then of course I learned over time that the tones that were representing these hidden things inside me that I couldn't really recognize, that those didn't go anywhere. What winning an argument, what good is that?
Right.
And so I'm someone who's rational and data driven, and I'm, I can argue.
And women are not, so then you're screwed, right?
Right, exactly. And so anyway, we never really had arguments, but the tone really didn't get righteous, I think, until it took like 20 years, really. And it was not her. She liked those discussions from the very beginning. But it just took me that much time, because I'm kind of dim, to realize that this was really a lot more fun than not having the control over the tone, because the tone really is sort of the way that the soul, the other person recognizes, and the fight or flight, all this stuff is going on. The tone really sets, how you're going to proceed emotionally. And so I just, in the context of what we've been talking about, Jan, I would just say that you're having a hard time with relationships. People out there, you're a woman and your boyfriend is a porn addict. I mean, there are just so many horror stories out there.
Absolutely.
I would just say one thing I would hope that would be tried if you want to move into a committed relationship is try to work on the tone. Is just try to say, look, here's our history. I mean, I think that the preamble that I was kind of right at the beginning, I say that's a good thing for people to like bring to the first date, I mean, and just say, look, here we are. This is our real history. It isn't the propaganda with the flags and the Star Spangled Banner.
Well, they might just think you're a crazy conspiracy theorist and not talk to you.
Yeah, well, that's always a problem, because, and of course that is a problem, is that it's hard to find people, like we were talking earlier about the alt world.
Right.
It's like literally like it's a schism, it's like you look at like Building 7 collapse, symmetrical and free fall speed and the dust cloud that just spews out. I mean, this is controlled demolition. Someone who cannot see that, someone who looks at that and goes, well, the government says it's because there was a fire, right? Well, that person is not in the alt world. That's not someone. That's very hard to have a discussion with this person. But, you shouldn't abandon that individual. Even in that instance, I would say, again, just control tone and just try to be there with that individual, work through the process of like, well, what are the rules of physics? Like, what do we know about controlled demolition? There has to be a way to try to open the mind. But if you can't, that's just not a relationship you want. But I'm talking about, when you're in a relationship, and we haven't even gone into this other issue, Jan, of like, what happens if you get into a relationship, you're attracted to someone, and then you get into the relationship and they say, well, that's all conspiracy theory.
Sure. Well, and that happens a lot. Or
it happens a lot, And so what can you do?
It's happened to me before, and I've,
right.
And it's, it's like there's been times when I would just do the show, and this was, many years ago, and they would have to sit quietly in the other room, and they would hear the show, and then I'd get off the air and go out there, and they'd have a totally different look on their face about me and, and everything that they had heard in the background, and they were stunned that they had, never considered this stuff. I mean, it is possible, but you almost have to have a captive audience for it.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's also another level of things where, the relationship really requires, aside from the commitment, and commitment is a lot of things. Commitment isn't just like we think of, just you're committed in this relationship. What is commitment? It's, being honest, being keeping to schedules so that that you can rely on the partner to pick up the children or to be somewhere. You have to know that the other person has your back. There's keeping small promises and big ones, because if you make the person doubt you on smaller issues, well, then they're probably going to doubt you on larger ones as well. And so the honesty, the integrity, keeping to the commitments, just keeping your promises, your schedules, your honor intact. The two of you then have, us men mostly, a lot of women too, I suppose, need to work on our voices and our tone, and women
one thing I'll say is that if you start walking down the path that created by the right tone toward real intimacy, intellectual intimacy, I think that now the commitment has a good chance of success. Because, as I was mentioning, it is a relief. It is actually, this is the real way that we are meant to exist, not just between men and women, but men and men, women and women. This is the congregation that the social animal needs to have in order to feel balanced, to feel like we're really in the world in a healthy way, And so, but once this path starts to be trod, it has the force of righteousness. In other words, it will connect into the real biology, because this is the right way. Just like logic. Logic, once someone...
Right. What it's doing it again. What comes after logic in the trivium but rhetoric? So, I mean, this is the hard part for us big angry guys to get under wraps. Apparently it's if it took 20 years for you, I mean, it's it's something that we have to commit to working on,
right? And
not in a weird NLP NVC way, because yeah. NLP and NVC was created by the CIA to get people to not look at facts and to make ad hominems internally at the person, rather than looking at reality and dealing with it. So we're not talking about Carl Rogers and Marshall Rosenberg and the CIA's crap.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, we need to recognize that we have been damaged and attacked, and our subconscious has been damaged. See, this was something that really this was one of the things that took me the hardest to understand, is that. And when I looked at, like the Time Life magazine, the words teenage allowances, right, underneath Wasson's description of Wasson. Now that's attacking the subconscious. You can defend yourself through logic if you are good at it, but how do you actually detect subconscious attacks? In other words, like the effects of Miley Cyrus, the generalized effects of pornography, these things affect the subconscious. So,
what's funny, Joe? I've noticed lately that when I watch movies, like, okay, I watched that old 90s film with Michael Douglas and what's her name last night?
Sharon Stone.
Sharon Stone, right. And there's this hot sex scene, and I found that I automatically turned away from it.
Yeah,
it felt like voyeurism, and I just didn't like it.
I turned away from it. I just can't stand Michael Douglas's ass.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you remembered it all this time.
Yeah, it's like seared into my brain. I mean,
oh, that's hilarious.
But the thing is that, I mean, I think that response is just. I mean, my gosh, that is so healthy,
Well, and if you look at children, and we're both parents.
Yeah.
And if you look at children, they are in their young age, when they see something on TV that's sexual, they automatically turn away from it. They don't want it. It has to be conditioned into them and made, it's like, oh no, they're kids naturally like this. They get prudish. No, kids are naturally, they don't want to see that stuff. They cover their eyes, they turn their heads. Yeah. And then there is a deconditioning process where this stuff becomes normalized in society, and then the constant barrage of pornography every time they search something on Google or whatever, and this becoming, the part of the sexual life. So then it becomes something normal. But I think, the natural instinct, the basic instinct, ironically, is to turn away from this when we see it. And I don't think it's, just in children, because I was watching the film and I'm watching these two and I just automatically turned away from it. And then I caught myself doing it. And I thought that was really interesting that I caught myself.
You know how you can be sure that's the healthy response is that simply go back to Sigmund Freud.
Right.
And look at how he is trying to say, you're crazy because you're sexually repressed. And we need to, ratchet up, your understanding of your libido and express a little bit more. Now, bear in mind that Freud leads directly to Edward Bernays, his nephew, his double family weird, double nephew individual.
Right.
Who then, and then going to the article we wrote, Manufacturing the Deadhead, we outlined how Bernays was at the very seminal moment for all of these destructive cultural elements, including pornography, right? Bernays is basically just reflecting this understanding of human minds that Freud had, and then he's representing it in a really destructive way, you see. So this is part of the attack. And when you look at Freud's talking about, we've got to loosen up sexuality, otherwise we'll be hysterical. Well, you know what? Don't believe a word the guy says. Look at him as a weapon. Look at Bernays as a weapon. Look at Erich Fromm and the MKUltra psychiatrists as weapons. They're not sincere. This is well-designed, intellectual sophistry to try to get us to turn in a bad direction. That's what we've been exposed to. And so, the fact that you didn't want to look at Michael Douglas's ass, well,
or even Sharon Stone's, her
breasts. I mean, the right approach would be to try to have the sexual visual response be a part of the energy that creates a really satisfying family to be living within. And so,
absolutely.
So this is when you see Miley Cyrus and she comes out dressed as an animal with no clothes on, and she takes her tongue and puts it like 4 inches out and holds it there the whole time to indicate, slobbering. I mean, it's a weapon. It's there simply to get into your mind and to damage you. And so this is, once we are aware of this, we can turn away from the mainstream media, and we can also then work to control these elements that are in our mind that are so destructive to really where we want to head as healthy social animals, which is to family, which is to congregation, community, ethnic pride, all the things that have been taken away from us. And you end up with the lone wolf white male, drunk and on ecstasy in a rave party. I mean, it's just pitiful,
At Burning Man.
and this is like, well, I'm really having a great time. I'm really doing something that's fun. And then, he wakes up one morning and goes, what the hell have I done? So this is, relationships in the modern world, John, they're very difficult.
Absolutely they are. And, next week, we're hoping to have Steve Outram on to discuss Burning Man. And, of course, he runs Burners Me. And I just released, what was it, last night or a couple nights ago, I released part 2 of my series with him. And it's an ongoing series. So we'll have him here to talk about that. Please support us and CCN.
Support us, support Gnostic Media, go to Post Flaviana, and I really have enjoyed your conversations with Steve. I hope everyone goes to Gnostic Media and listens to them. Very important stuff. And hopefully we'll have Steve on next week. We can really get into some interesting things. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Good night, and until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.